An immigrant refused a bribe, never realizing it was a secret test from the CEO. The words echoed in Tariq Nassar's mind as he stared at his reflection in the scratched mirror of the tiny apartment bathroom. His weathered face told the story of his 36 years, the last 3 spent in America, chasing a dream that kept slipping further away. The morning light filtered weakly through the frosted window, casting pale shadows across the cramped space he shared with 2 other men he barely knew. His roommates worked night shifts, Tariq worked days. They passed like ghosts, leaving notes about bills and borrowed milk. This wasn't the America he had imagined when he left Damascus, with a head full of hope and pockets empty of everything except a creased photograph of his late parents. Outside, Chicago's winter snarled, the kind of cold that didn't exist in Syria, a cold that found the holes in his second-hand coat and turned his fingers blue as he waited for the bus each morning. Still, Tariq adjusted his tie, the one professional item he owned, smoothing it against his chest as though it might somehow transform the rest of his appearance. Today will be different, he whispered, a ritual he'd performed every morning for months. The words hung in the air, fragile as breath against glass. He had been a respected engineer in Damascus. Here he was lucky to have secured a job as a maintenance worker at Meridian Tower, one of Chicago's gleaming corporate monoliths. The irony wasn't lost on him. Once he had designed buildings, now he cleaned them. The bus was late. Again. Tariq stamped his feet on the salt-crusted sidewalk, checking his watch anxiously. Twice in 1 month he had been written up for tardiness, despite his explanations about unreliable public transportation. His supervisor, Jenkins, had made it clear that a 3rd infraction could mean termination. "Nobody cares about your problems, buddy," Jenkins had said, not unkindly, but with the weariness of someone who had heard too many excuses. "This is America. You show up on time or someone else gets your spot." When Tariq finally arrived at Meridian Tower, he was 7 minutes late. He slipped through the service entrance, hoping to avoid Jenkins. But the man was waiting, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. "Nassar, my office." Jenkins' office was a converted storage room with no windows, lit by fluorescent tubes that hummed faintly. He gestured for Tariq to sit, then looked at him with unexpected intensity. "You know what happens now." Tariq's throat tightened. "Mr. Jenkins, please. The bus—" "I don't want to hear it." Jenkins cut him off, then lowered his voice. "Look, between us, you're the best worker I've got. You see things that others miss. You fix problems before they become problems. But rules are rules." Tariq's hands trembled slightly in his lap. He couldn't lose this job. Not now. Not when his sister Amira had finally secured permission to join him in America, arriving in just 3 weeks. He had promised to take care of her. However, Jenkins continued, sliding a form across the desk. "I'm willing to mark you as on time today, and maybe we can make sure your record stays clean." Tariq stared at the form, a maintenance log already filled out with his signature forged at the bottom, certifying safety checks that hadn't been performed. "Some inspections get missed." "It happens," Jenkins said, his voice casual. "We backdate the paperwork. Everybody's happy. Corporate never knows the difference." He opened his desk drawer and removed $300 bills, placing them beside the form. "Consider it a bonus for being flexible." The money sat between them, more than Tariq earned in 2 days. Money that could help with Amira's arrival, with the security deposit on a better apartment. For one moment, one shameful moment, his fingers twitched toward the bills. Then he saw his father's face in his mind. The man who had taught mathematics at the university for 40 years, who had returned bribes from wealthy parents seeking better grades for their children, even when the family had struggled to pay for Tariq's engineering textbooks. "I cannot," Tariq said quietly, pushing back from the desk. "I am sorry, Mr. Jenkins. Fire me if you must, but I cannot sign for work I did not do." Jenkins' expression darkened. "You think you're better than the rest of us? Too good to play by real-world rules? This isn't a philosophy class, Nassar. This is survival." "No," Tariq said, finding his voice growing steadier. "This is integrity. In my country before the war, I was respected for my work. Here I mop floors and change light bulbs, but I still have my name, my honor." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Perhaps that is all I have left, but I will keep it." He stood, removing his ID badge. "I will clean out my locker." Jenkins didn't move to take the badge. Instead, he looked at Tariq with an expression that seemed almost like respect. "Put that away," he said finally. "Take the elevator to 38. Emma in HR wants to see you. They're probably going to ask you to sign termination papers." He paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're making a mistake. But I respect that you made it." The 38th floor was another world. Tarek had cleaned it many times, but always after hours, when the vast open workspace with its panoramic views of Lake Michigan was empty of the people who belonged there. Now suited men and women moved with purpose between glass-walled conference rooms. Several glanced at him with surprise or confusion. The cleaner, in his gray uniform, clearly out of place. The receptionist at the circular desk, Emma Bishop, Human Resources, on her nameplate, looked up with professional detachment when he approached. "Mr. Nassar?" she asked, pronouncing his name correctly, which surprised him. "Please follow me." She led him not to an HR office as he expected, but to a conference room at the end of the hall. The door was heavy frosted glass, etched with Meridian's logo. "Wait here," she instructed, gesturing to one of 12 empty chairs surrounding a massive table. Tarek sat stiffly, his calloused hands resting on his knees. Through the glass wall, he watched Chicago spread beneath him, 38 floors removed from the streets he walked daily. From this height, the city looked almost peaceful, the problems of bus schedules and overdue rent payments impossibly distant. The door opened and a woman entered. Not Emma from HR, but someone he recognized immediately from the portraits hanging in the lobby. Eleanor Kwan, CEO of Meridian Industries, one of Chicago's wealthiest women and most powerful executives. She was smaller in person than her reputation suggested, perhaps 5'3", with a crisp bob of silver-streaked black hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Tarek's annual salary. "Mr. Nassar," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." Confused, he stood and shook her hand, noting the firm grip. You know my name? Please, sit." She took a seat across from him rather than at the head of the table. "I know quite a bit about you, actually. Damascus University, civil engineering, graduated with honors. 5 years with Hadid Construction before the war. Arrived in the United States 3 years ago after 18 months in a Turkish refugee camp." Tarek stared at her, speechless. "You're wondering why the CEO of Meridian Industries knows your biography," she said, a slight smile touching her lips. "And why I'm meeting with a maintenance worker who's about to be fired for tardiness." "Yes," he managed. "You weren't going to be fired for being late, Mr. Nassar. You were going to be fired for accepting a bribe to falsify safety inspections." She placed a small recording device on the table between them. "Jenkins works for me. Directly for me, not maintenance. The money, the form, the offer, it was a test. One that 90% of people fail, I'm sorry to say." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "A test? 6 months ago, we had an incident at our Philadelphia location. An elevator cable that should have been replaced wasn't. The paperwork said it had been. 3 people were seriously injured." She removed her glasses, suddenly looking tired. The investigation revealed a pattern of maintenance records being falsified to save money, with managers bribing workers to sign off on inspections that never happened. She gestured toward the device. "So now, before anyone at Meridian gets access to critical safety systems, they get tested. Jenkins offers the same bribe to everyone. Most people take it." Tarek felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief at not being fired, anger at being deceived, pride that he had passed a test he hadn't known he was taking. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Why tell me this? Why are you here instead of someone from HR?" Eleanor Kwan studied him for a long moment. "Because integrity is rare, Mr. Nassar. When I find it, I pay attention." She slid a folder across the table. "This is a job offer. Assistant Facilities Manager for our new Safety Compliance Division. The salary is 3 times what you make now, with full benefits and a relocation allowance." Tarek stared at the folder without opening it. I don't have qualifications for management in America." "You have exactly the qualification I'm looking for," she replied. "You can't be bought." She tapped the folder. "Your engineering degree and experience are more than adequate for the technical aspects. We'll provide management training." "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "There must be hundreds of applicants with American degrees. Perfect English?" "I'm not interested in perfect English," she interrupted. "I'm interested in perfect ethics. Do you know how I built this company, Mr. Nassar?" He shook his head. "I started with nothing. Immigrant parents, tiny apartment in San Francisco's Chinatown. 5 people in 2 rooms?" Her eyes took on a distant look. "My father worked 3 jobs. My mother sewed in a garment factory until her fingers bled. They taught me that when you have nothing else, you still have your principles." She refocused on him. "That lesson built Meridian. Not connections, not privilege. Integrity." She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "The offer is good for 48 hours. Talk to Emma on your way out about the paperwork. And Mr. Nassar? She paused at the door. That sister of yours who's arriving next month. Amira, is it? Meridian has an excellent engineering intern program for recent graduates. If her credentials are anything like yours, we'd be interested in reviewing her application. After she left, Tariq sat alone in the conference room, staring at the closed folder. Through the window, he watched clouds gather over Lake Michigan, heavy with the promise of snow. Something warm and unfamiliar expanded in his chest. Not quite happiness, but perhaps its precursor. Hope. 3 floors below, Eleanor Kwan entered her private office and locked the door behind her, a habit from decades of needing to hide vulnerability. She moved to the wall of windows, looking out at the same view Tariq had seen, but seeing something different. Not the city's beauty, but its machinery. The endless transactions, compromises, and corruptions that kept it running. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. 30 years of building Meridian, of fighting her way through boardrooms of men who underestimated her, of sacrificing personal relationships for professional success. It had left her with an empire and a bone-deep cynicism she couldn't shake. The Nassar test had been her idea after Philadelphia. Most weeks, the results only confirmed her darkening view of human nature. People could be bought, usually cheaply. The rare exceptions like Tariq should have renewed her faith, but lately they only made her more tired. Integrity shouldn't be exceptional. It should be the baseline. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Board meeting in 10. Eleanor straightened, adjusted her suit jacket, and reached for the mask she wore for the board. Confident, uncompromising, invulnerable. She had almost secured it in place when her phone buzzed again. This time it was from Jenkins. Nassar accepted the position. Said to thank you for believing in second chances. Something small cracked in the edifice Eleanor had built around herself. Second chances. As though he was the recipient of her generosity, not the other way around. The board could wait 5 more minutes. She sat at her desk and pulled up Tariq's file again, studying the photograph attached to his employment records. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of her father, a quiet dignity that transcended circumstances. Second chances, she murmured, letting the words settle in the silence of her office. Perhaps they both needed one. Amira Nassar pressed her face against the airplane window as Chicago came into view, the morning sun glinting off glass towers and the vast blue expanse of Lake Michigan. After years of separation, after endless paperwork and interviews and waiting, she was finally joining her brother in America. She hadn't seen Tariq in person since he'd left Syria 3 years ago, their only connection being grainy video calls that dropped frequently. In their last conversation, he had sounded different, lighter somehow, as though some of the burden he'd carried since their parents' death had eased. "I have surprises," he had said, his smile wider than she'd seen it in years. "Good shimmer, good ones." Now as the plane touched down with a gentle bump, Amira felt a flutter of anxiety. What if America changed him? What if she no longer recognized the brother who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had helped her study for engineering exams, who had somehow arranged and paid for her passage out of Syria when the situation became untenable? Passengers shuffled through customs, a process Tariq had warned would be lengthy and intimidating. When she finally emerged into the arrival area, her eyes searched the crowd anxiously. And then she saw him, not in the shabby coat he'd worn in their video calls, but in a proper winter jacket, holding a sign with her name written in both English and Arabic. Beside him stood a small, elegant woman with silver-streaked hair whom Amira didn't recognize. "Tariq," she called, abandoning decorum to run toward him. He caught her in a fierce embrace, lifting her off her feet. "Little sister," he whispered against her hair. "You made it. You're here." When he set her down, he turned to introduce the woman beside him. "Amira, this is Miss Eleanor Kwan. My ... My boss." There was something in how he said it, not the tone of a subordinate, but almost like he was introducing a friend. "Please call me Eleanor," the woman said, offering her hand. "Your brother speaks of you constantly. I feel like I already know the brilliant engineer in the family." Amira shook her hand, confused but pleased. "You came to the airport to meet an employee's sister?" Eleanor and Tariq exchanged a glance that contained some private understanding. "Let's just say your brother made quite an impression," Eleanor replied. "And Meridian takes care of its own?" As they walked toward the exit, Tariq explaining that they would be taking Eleanor's car service rather than the bus, Amira studied her brother. There was something different about him, not just the new clothes or the better job he'd mentioned. He stood straighter, looked people in the eye more directly. He looked like their father had, before the war, a man comfortable in his own skin. The car that awaited them was sleek and black, with a driver who took Amira's luggage with efficient courtesy. As they settled into the leather seats, Tariq handed her an envelope. "Welcome to Chicago," he said, his eyes bright with suppressed excitement. Inside was a lease agreement for an apartment in a building called Lakeside Towers, with both their names listed as tenants. "Tariq, we can't afford—" "We can now," he assured her. "And wait until you see the view. You can see the lake from the living room." As the car pulled away from the curb, Eleanor's phone rang. She glanced at the screen inside. "I need to take this. Board politics." She answered with a crisp, "Quan here," and turned slightly toward the window. Amira leaned close to her brother. "How do you know the CEO of the company?" she whispered. "And why is she picking me up from the airport?" Tariq smiled. "It's a long story. One I'll tell you over dinner tonight." He glanced at Eleanor, who was speaking firmly into her phone about quarterly projections. "But I will tell you this. Sometimes the things that seem like obstacles are actually doorways." Amira raised an eyebrow. "Now you sound like Baba." "Good," Tariq said softly. "That's good." When Eleanor finished her call, she turned back to them with an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that. The board is restless about our new direction, emphasizing worker safety over quarterly profits." She looked at Tariq. "Some think I've gone soft." "Not soft," he replied. "Wise." Her expression softened momentarily before she straightened. "All business again." "Amira, has your brother told you about our engineering internship program?" The conversation turned to opportunities and possibilities, each word building a bridge between the life Amira had left behind and the one stretching before her. Outside the car windows, Chicago flowed past, imposing and beautiful, intimidating and full of promise. Tariq watched his sister engage with Eleanor, her initial shyness giving way to the passionate intelligence that had made her top of her class in Damascus. Pride swelled in his chest, alongside a gratitude so profound it felt like physical warmth. 3 months ago, he had been a man clinging to dignity while watching his dreams recede. Now he sat in a luxury car with the sister he'd feared he might never see again, heading toward a home with a view worth seeing, about to begin work that would use his mind as well as his hands. All because he had refused a bribe. All because, in his darkest moment, he had remembered who he was. As though sensing his thoughts, Eleanor caught his eye briefly. In that moment of connection, he saw something in her usually guarded expression, a reflection of his own gratitude, his own sense of something valuable recovered. Then it was gone, replaced by her customary self-possession as she pulled out her tablet to show Amira the specs for Meridian's newest development project. Tariq turned to look out the window, hiding his smile. Perhaps he wasn't the only one who had found something they thought lost. Perhaps integrity wasn't just a test you passed or failed, but a currency that, once exchanged, enriched both the giver and receiver. The car turned onto Lakeshore Drive, and Chicago opened before them, shimmering with possibility. 6 months later, Eleanor Kwan stood at the podium in Meridian Towers Grand Conference Center, facing a room filled with employees, press, and industry representatives. Behind her, a screen displayed the company's new slogan, "Building Tomorrow with Integrity Today." "A company is more than balance sheets and assets," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "It's a community of people making thousands of small decisions every day. The quality of those decisions, their fundamental integrity, determines not just our financial success, but who we are." In the front row, Tariq sat beside Amira, who had recently completed her internship and accepted a full-time position in Meridian's engineering department. Over the past months, he had built the new safety compliance division from the ground up, implementing systems that prioritize regular inspections and created anonymous reporting channels for safety concerns. Eleanor's gaze found his briefly as she continued. 6 months ago, Meridian launched an initiative to transform our corporate culture, putting integrity and safety above all other metrics. Today, I'm proud to announce that workplace accidents have decreased by 67% across all our properties. Applause filled the room. Eleanor waited for it to subside before continuing. But statistics only tell part of the story. The real change has been in how we see ourselves and each other. She stepped away from the podium, abandoning her prepared remarks. "When I started Meridian 30 years ago, I believed that success came from being the smartest person in the room. I was wrong. True success comes from surrounding yourself with people whose moral compass doesn't waver, even when no one is watching." She gestured toward Tariq. "I'd like to introduce someone who taught me that lesson." Tariq Nassar joined Meridian as a maintenance worker and now heads our safety compliance division. His integrity transformed not just his own life, but potentially saved countless others. And she added with a small, genuine smile rarely seen in her public appearances, he reminded a cynical CEO that principles aren't luxuries, they're necessities. Surprised, Tariq rose as the room applauded. Eleanor motioned for him to join her at the podium. Mrs. Kwan, Eleanor, I don't know what to say, he murmured as he reached her side. You don't need to say anything, she replied quietly. Just keep doing what you're doing. As the event concluded, journalists clustered around Eleanor, peppering her with questions about Meridian's new direction. Amira approached her brother, eyes bright with pride. The CEO just praised you in front of everyone, she said, slipping her arm through his. My brother, the company hero. Tariq shook his head, embarrassed. I only did what Baba would have done. And now look at us. Amira gestured around the opulent conference center. He would be so proud, Tariq. Not of this, she clarified, but of you, of who you remained when everything else was taken away. Later that evening, as the sunset painted Chicago's skyline in shades of amber and gold, Eleanor Kwan stood in Tariq's office doorway. He was working late, reviewing inspection protocols for Meridian's newest acquisition. You missed the executive reception, she said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up, surprised to see her there. The executive suite was 20 floors above his office. I wanted to finish these reviews before tomorrow's meeting. Always the conscientious one. She entered, taking a seat across from his desk. For a moment, she simply studied him, her expression thoughtful. Do you know why I really created that test? The bribe scenario? He shook his head. After the Philadelphia accident, I was lost. I'd built this company on certain principles, but somewhere along the way, we'd strayed from them. People got hurt. She looked down at her hands, uncharacteristically vulnerable. I needed to know if integrity still existed at Meridian, or if I'd been fooling myself all these years. And did you find your answer? Tariq asked quietly. Not at first. So many failed. Jenkins reported each one with this growing cynicism in his voice. I started to believe we were... She paused, searching for the right word. Irredeemable. But then I came along and refused $300, Tariq said with a small smile. You refused it even though you needed it desperately. Even though no one would have known. She met his eyes directly. You made me remember why I built Meridian in the first place. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with mutual respect that had deepened over the months into something approaching friendship. Unlikely as that seemed given their different positions and backgrounds. I've been meaning to ask you, Eleanor said finally. That phrase you use sometimes about obstacles actually being doorways. Is that from your father? Tariq nodded. He said it often, especially after we lost our home in the early days of the war. What looks like the end of one path is often the beginning of a better one. I didn't believe him then. And now, he gestured around the office. His name on the door, the view of the city below, the authority he'd been given to implement real change. Now I think he was right. Eleanor stood, smoothing her immaculate suit. Well, your father was a wise man, and Meridian is fortunate his son carries that wisdom. She moved toward the door, then paused. The board has approved the expansion of your department. You'll need to hire more people. I've already started reviewing applications. Good. Look for people like yourself, those who understand that integrity isn't a luxury. Her professional mask slipped momentarily. They're rare but worth finding. After she left, Tariq stood by the window, watching the city lights emerge as darkness fell. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the losses, the struggles, the moment of choice in Jenkins' office that had altered everything. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a photo of his parents, taken in their garden in Damascus before the war. His father's kind eyes, his mother's determined smile. He had carried their lessons across oceans and borders, through refugee camps and cold Chicago winters. You were right, Baba, he whispered to the image. Some doors only open when others close. Outside his window, Chicago stretched beneath an ink-dark sky, no longer a foreign landscape, but a place where he had found not just survival, but purpose. A place where, against all odds, an immigrant had refused a bribe, never realizing it was a secret test from the CEO, and in doing so, had passed a far more important test, remembering who he was when everything familiar had been stripped away. And in that remembering, he had helped someone else find what they had lost as well. Behind every test of character lies the possibility of transformation, not just for the one being tested, but for the one administering the test. Sometimes integrity isn't just about standing firm in your own principles. It's about reminding others of theirs. In the end, perhaps that's the most powerful gift one person can give another. The mirror that reflects not who they become, but who they've always been beneath the layers of compromise and doubt. Tariq turned from the window and returned to his desk, to the work of building systems that would protect people he would never meet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests. But tonight, in this moment, he knew with quiet certainty that he had found his path. That the journey from Damascus to Chicago, from engineer to janitor to executive, had been leading him here all along, to this place where his father's wisdom and his own choices had converged to create something unexpected and beautiful. A second chance not just for himself, but for everyone his work would touch.